The Ares Ascendant, a rogue human warship, defies the Galactic Council, sparking panic and retaliation. After a fierce battle and the ship's sacrifice, its crew survives, vowing to rally allies and ignite a rebellion against the Council's oppressive rule. Before we start, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. Only 4% of my channel is subscribed. The plot follows the crew of the futuristic battleship Ares Ascendant as they oppose the Galactic Council's harsh leadership, sacrificing their ship to destroy a powerful Council superweapon and spark rebellion among humanity's outcasts. Though the Ares is lost, her crew survives and begins creating a resistance movement in the galaxy's edges, promising to continue fighting against the Council's tyranny. Before we start, a little reminder to hit the subscribe button. Just 4% of my channel is subscribed. The cruiser hung in the void like a beast, too vicious to be restrained. Its hull glinted faintly under the cold light of a fading star. The Ares Ascendant wasn't just a spacecraft. It was a statement, a human fist, hammered into the galaxy's delicate table of peace. For decades, the Galactic Council had preached peace, balance, and restraint, their treaties linking 1,000 species into a frail web of cohabitation. But humanity? We'd never been excellent at playing nice. And when we unveiled the Ares, the Council didn't just flinch, they terrified. The commander stood on the bridge, his boots planted hard against the quiet hum of the deck. He was a guy fashioned from stubborn grit, damaged, unyielding, and tired of apologies. His dark eyes tracked the hollow display flickering before him, a live stream of the Council's armada, a mismatched fleet of swift Illyri cutters and ponderous Corran dreadnoughts, all converging on their position. They'd come to enforce edict. Declaration 719, the ruling that declared the Ares an abomination, a weapon too dangerous to exist. Illegal, they termed it. He smirked. Illegal was merely another word for effective. Status, he barked, voice rough as gravel. The lieutenant spun in her chair, fingers dancing over the console. Shields at full, gravitic cannons primed. The Council's hailing us again, third time in 10 minutes. They're demanding surrender. Let them wait, he said, crossing his arms. What's the word from Earth? She hesitated, her sharp features stiffening. High Command says we're on our own. They're disavowing the Ares, claiming it was a rogue project. A murmur rippled across the bridge crew. 20 souls who'd put their lives into this ship, who violated instructions and treaties to see it fly. The commander felt the sting of it too, a harsh twist in his gut. Earth had borne the Ares in secret, pouring billions into its tech, nanite swarms, quantum reactors, weapons that could fracture moons like eggshells. And now, with the Council closing in, they'd cut the connection. Cowards. Rogue project, he mumbled, almost chuckling. Guess that makes us pirates. Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. And yes, something fiercer too. Loyalty. What's the play? He didn't answer right away. He turned to the glass, marveling at the AR's reflection in the starlight. It was beautiful in a harsh way, sleek curves masking a skeleton of reinforced alloy, its surface swarming with adaptable nanites that could heal breaches in seconds. The ship wasn't simply advanced. It was alive. A beast born for war in a galaxy that believed it didn't need one. The Council feared it because they couldn't control it. And humans, they dreaded it because it indicated what we could become. Open the channel, he said finally. Let them hear what they've got to say. The holoflake flashed to life, displaying the Council's envoy, an Elther named Vixra, all shimmering scales and sanctimonious calm. Her voice slithered across the speakers, precise and chilly. Commander, this is your final warning. The Ares Ascendant violates every tenet of galactic law. Its weapons threaten the stability of 100 systems. Power down and submit to decommissioning, or we will act. He leaned forward, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unnerve her. You know what's funny, Vixra? You call it a threat. I call it insurance. Your precious Council's been strangling us for decades. Taxes, sanctions, peacekeeping fleets parked over our colonies. The Ares levels the field. Vixra's eyes narrowed, a flare of violet in the hollow. You overestimate your position, human. You are one ship. We are many. And yet you're scared, he shot back. If we're so insignificant, why is half your fleet breathing down my neck? The envoy didn't flinch, but the delay told him everything. She cut the feed and the hollow winked out. The lieutenant's console pinged a second later. They're charging weapons, she added, voice tense. Orders. His mouth clenched. He'd known it had come to this the moment they'd started. The Ares wasn't intended to bow. It was built to fight. And now, abandoned by Earth, hounded by the cosmos, it was all they had left. He glanced at his men, saw the resolution in their faces, the calm fire of people with nothing to lose. "Battle stations," he said, "let's show them why they're right to be afraid." The deck thrummed as the Ares woke fully, its systems chanting a hymn of resistance. Out there, the Council's ships closed in, a noose tightening around a beast they didn't understand. He sunk into his chair, the weight of it all weighing down. Betrayal, pride, and a flash of something deeper. This wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's last stand, and he'd be damned if it went down softly. The Ares Ascendant trembled as its engines erupted, a harsh growl resonating through the hull. The commander didn't flinch. He'd felt worse shakes on training runs back when the ship was still a skeleton of aspiration buried in Earth's orbital yards. Now, though, it wasn't a drill. The Council's fleet was moving, their ships spreading out like a pack of wolves around prey. He could see it on the hollow display, the Alari cutters darting into flanking positions, their plasma lances burning, hot, while the Coran dreadnoughts lumbered forward, bristling with missile bays. They outnumbered the Ares 10-1, maybe more, but numbers didn't tell the whole picture. Not with this ship. "Targeting solutions locked," the lieutenant yelled out, her voice piercing through the hum of the bridge. "Gravitic cannons. Already on your mark. Shields holding at 98%. He nodded, his attention fixated on the window. The enemy fleet was a swarm of lights against the black, each one a threat of violence. He'd seen combat before, pirate raids, border skirmishes, but nothing like this. The Council didn't fight nasty, they fought absolute. They smothered their attackers with firepower until nothing was left but slag and quiet. Unless he hit first, unless he hit hard. "Fire," he said. The word dropped like a stone. The deck pulsed as the gravitic cannons unleashed their fury, invisible waves of force pouring out, altering space itself. The nearest Alari cutter didn't stand a chance, its hull bent inward, folding like wet paper before erupting in a quiet bloom of fire and debris. The bridge crew didn't cheer. They didn't have time. Alerts shouted as the Council returned fire, plasma bolts cutting across the abyss. The Ares shields flashed, absorbing the hits, but the strain was already evident. Nanites swarmed the hull, repairing microfractures as rapidly as they created. "Evasive pattern, Delta," he instructed. "Keep us moving. Target the dreadnoughts. Next, they're the backbone." The ship lurched, its thrusters shrieking as it twisted through the turmoil. The lieutenant's hands rushed over her panel, rerouting power, recalibrating armaments. She was good, damn good, and he trusted her with his life, with all their lives. But trust wouldn't stop the math. They were burning through energy reserves faster than he'd intended, and the Council wasn't slowing down. For every ship, they crippled. 2 more seemed to take its place. A voice crackled over the intercom, crisp and urgent. "Sir, engineering reports a spike in the quantum core. It's overheating, pushing past safety limits." He cursed under his breath. The core was the Ares' heart, the tech that made it a monster. Unstable, unpredictable, and powerful enough to alter the rules of battle. Earth's engineers had warned him, push it too far, and it could tear the spacecraft apart. Or worse. He'd ignored them then, banking on human inventiveness to beat extraterrestrial caution. Now, that bet was being challenged. "Tell them to hold it together," he snapped. "We don't back off now." The lieutenant flashed him a look, brief, piercing, but said nothing. She knew the stakes as well as he did. They'd all signed up for this, knowing it might end in a fireball, knowing Earth had already written them off. The thought gnawed. At him, a splinter of wrath beneath the quiet. His homeworld had built this ship to defy the galaxy, then abandoned it the second the cosmos pushed back. "If we survive this," he whispered, "I'll have words for High Command." Another bomb rocked the Ares. The shields wavered as a Coran missile crept past. The deck bucked, and a console sparked, sending one of the crew falling. "Hull breach?" "Sector 5!" someone cried. "Nanites are on it, but we're losing pressure." "Seal it off," he muttered, steadying himself against his chair. "Focus fire on that dreadnought port side bearing 270. Take it down." The gravitic cannons sang again, and this time the dreadnought didn't just crack, it broke. Its midsection collapsed into a swirl of twisted metal, releasing atmosphere. A cheer finally broke through the crew, ragged and defiant. But it was short-lived. The hollow display lighted up with new signatures, reinforcements coming in, from a jump point 10 clicks out. More ships, more firepower. The council wasn't playing anymore. "Sir," the lieutenant murmured, her voice low, almost smothered by the alarms. "We can't take them all. Not like this." He glanced to her, saw the tension carved into her face, the same strain he felt in his bones. She wasn't wrong. The Ares was a marvel, but it wasn't invincible. Not yet. He clenched his fists, mind racing. Surrender wasn't an option. They'd demolish the ship, put the crew away, and bury humanity's defiance behind a pile of bureaucracy. Running might buy time. But where to? Earth wouldn't take them back. The colonies were too feeble to hide them. "We don't have to take them all," he murmured finally, a light burning in his chest. "Just enough to make them regret this." She grimaced, but before she could argue, the communications crackled again. This time it wasn't engineering. It was a signal, encrypted, human, and coming from outer space. "Unidentified source," the comms officer stated, voice shaking. "They're asking for you. Says it's about the Ares." He froze. A lifeline? A trap? Either way, it was a shift in the game. And right now, with the council bearing down and the ship bleeding, he'd take any chance he could get. "Patch it through," he said. "Let's see who's still betting on us." The static cleared, and a voice, human, rough, and impossibly familiar, filled the bridge. "You're a hard man to find, Commander. Thought you might need a hand." The voice on the comms cut through the chaos like a blade, rough-edged and human in a way that made the commander's skin prickle. For a moment, the blaring alarms and the shudder of the Ares ascendant under fire faded into the background. He knew that voice. Gravelly, weathered, the kind that carried scars in every syllable. It belonged to a man he'd buried in his memory years ago. A ghost from a past he'd rather forget. But ghosts didn't hail warships in the middle of a firefight. "Who is this?" he demanded, his tone sharp enough to slice steel. "Identify yourself!" A low chuckle crackled through the static, unhurried despite the hell breaking loose around them. "You've gotten grumpier, I'll give you that. It's me, you stubborn bastard. Thought you'd recognize an old friend." The commander's gut twisted. An old friend. That narrowed it down to a handful of names, most of them dead or scattered across the galaxy after the last war. But only one had the gall to sound amused while the council's fleet pounded the Ares into submission. "You're supposed to be gone," he said, voice low. "Off the grid. What the hell are you doing out here?" "Watching you stir the pot, same as always," the voice replied. "Saw the Ares light up the feeds, couldn't resist. Figured you'd need a lifeline about now?" The lieutenant spun from her console, eyes wide. "Sir, incoming signatures, 5 ships, human transponders. They're closing fast from the jump point. Armed to the teeth." The holographic display flickered, confirming her words. 5 jagged silhouettes emerged from the void, their hulls patched and scarred. Nothing like the pristine fleets of the council. Pirate rigs, maybe, or rogue colony cutters. Vessels that screamed defiance in every dented plate. The commander's mind raced. Reinforcements? Out here? It didn't add up. Earth had disavowed them, and no colony had the spine or the firepower to challenge the council. Yet here they were, barreling toward the fight like they'd been waiting for the call. "Friends of yours?" the lieutenant asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "Not sure yet," he muttered. "Patch him through again." The comms flared back to life. "Took some convincing, but I rounded up a few who still believe in what the Ares stands for. We're here to even the odds." "Even the odds?" The commander's laugh was bitter, edged with exhaustion. "We're staring down a council armada. 5 ships won't change that." 5 ships and a plan," the voice shot back. "You've got the muscle, we've got the guile. Trust me. For once, will you?" Trust. The word hit like a punch. He didn't trust easy, not after Earth's betrayal, not after years of watching allies turn tail when the heat came down. But the Ares was bleeding. Shields down to 60%, nanites struggling to keep up with the damage. The Council's dreadnoughts were regrouping, their cutters weaving tighter patterns, and those reinforcements wouldn't stop firing just because a few humans showed up late to the party. He didn't have the luxury of doubt. "Fine," he growled. "What's the play?" "Keep their attention," the voice said. "Draw their fire. Push those fancy cannons of yours to the limit. We'll flank them, hit their supply line, their jump drives. They'll scatter when they realize they're stranded. It was reckless. Insane, even. The Ares could barely hold its own, and splitting the council's focus relied on perfect timing, something they hadn't had since this mess started. But the alternative was dying slow, and he'd never been one for drawn-out endings. "Do it," he said. To the lieutenant, "Full power to weapons. Target their lead ships. Make them flinch." She didn't hesitate, her hands a blur across the controls. The Ares roared back to life, gravitic cannons spitting death into the void. Another Alari cutter imploded, its wreckage spiraling into a dreadnought's path. The council fleet faltered, just for a heartbeat, and that's when the newcomers struck. The rogue ships darted in fast and feral, unloading salvos into the enemy's rear. A supply frigate erupted in a plume of flame, its debris scattering like ash. The bridge crew let out a ragged cheer, but the commander didn't join them. He watched the hologram, saw the council adjust. Too fast, too smart. The dreadnoughts pivoted, their missile bays locking onto the new threat. The plan was working, but it was fragile. A house of cards in a storm. One wrong move, and they'd all be dust. "Shields at 40%, the lieutenant reported, her voice tight. "Cores spiking again, engineering screaming red." "Push it," he said, ignoring the dread creeping up his spine. "We stop now, we're done." The Ares shuddered as another hit landed. A plasma lance carving a gash along its flank. The nanites swarmed, but slower now, their reserves thinning out. In the void, one of the rogue ships took a direct hit, its hull splitting open like overripe fruit. The comms crackled with a scream, then silence. The commander's jaw tightened, a cost he hadn't wanted to pay, but one he'd known was coming. "They're breaking formation," the lieutenant said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "The council's pulling back. They're cutters." He looked to the hologram. She was right. The smaller ships were retreating, shielding the dreadnoughts as they lumbered toward. The jump point. The plan was holding, barely. But the voice on the comms wasn't celebrating yet. "Stay sharp," it warned. "They're not running. They're regrouping, and they've got something big coming." The hologram pinged, a new signature blooming at the edge of the system. Massive, sleek, and radiating power that dwarfed even the dreadnoughts, though Commander's blood ran cold. He'd seen specs like that once, in classified briefs. Council superweapon, a planet killer. They'd sworn never to deploy it. Until now. "Guess they're done playing nice," he muttered, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Time to see what the Ares is really made of. The new signature on the holographic display pulsed like a heartbeat, a colossus of sleek metal and malice, dwarfing everything else in the void. The commander stared at it, his breath catching for a split second before he forced it steady. He'd heard whispers of the council's Ecliptor, a ship so monstrous they'd buried its existence under layers of denials and redacted files. A planet killer, they called it, though no one had seen it in action. Until now. Its silhouette was all sharp angles and glowing conduits, a predator built to end wars before they started. And it was here, sliding into the fray with a silence that felt more threatening than any roar. "Status on that thing!" he snapped, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet of the bridge. The lieutenant's fingers trembled as they danced over her console, pulling data from the Ares sensors. "It's massive, 3 times our size. Energy, readings off the charts. Weapon signatures match nothing we've got on file, sir. It's charging something. Big." Big didn't cover it. The hologram zoomed in, showing a faint shimmer along the Ecliptor's bow. A distortion that screamed experimental tech, the kind that could vaporize the Ares and its ragtag allies in one shot. The commander's mind raced, piecing together scraps of intel from old briefings. If the rumors were true, "Pods are clear," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in the deck beneath them. "Cores at critical mass. Detonation in 90 seconds. He nodded, his gaze flicking to the viewport. The council's dreadnoughts loomed closer, their hulking. Forms blotting out the stars, cannons glowing with the promise of a quick end. They didn't know what was coming, a blast that would turn the Ares into a supernova, taking as many of them with it as physics allowed. It wasn't victory, not really. But it was something. A scar on the galaxy's face they wouldn't forget. "Should've gone with them," he said, not looking at her. "Someone had to push the button," she replied, a faint edge of defiance in her tone. "Besides, you didn't." He almost smiled. Almost. She was right. He couldn't leave the Ares. Not after everything. It had carried them through. It was more than a ship. It was their defiance, their rage, their proof that humanity wouldn't just roll over for the Council's boot. If it was going down, he'd go with it. And she'd made the same call. The comms crackled, the rough voice of their ally breaking through. One last time. Pods are out. Good work. We're pulling back, drawing their fire. If you're still on that thing, get the hell off now. Too late for that, the commander said, keeping his tone flat. Make sure the crew gets clear. That's all that matters. A pause, then a curse muttered through the static. You're a damn fool. Always were. Good luck, you crazy bastard. The line went dead, and the hologram showed the rogue ships veering off, luring a few of the dreadnoughts into a chase. It wouldn't save the Ares, but it might buy the pods time. That was enough. The commander settled into his chair, the deck vibrating as the core's whine grew deafening. 60 seconds. You ever think it'd end like this? The lieutenant asked, her voice softer now, almost lost in the noise. He glanced at her, saw the flicker of something human in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. Didn't think that far, he admitted. Just wanted to hit back. Make them feel it. She nodded, like that was answer enough. They'll feel this. The viewport flared as a dreadnought fired, a missile slamming into the Ares' flank. The ship lurched, consoles sparking, but the nanites were long past saving it. The core's timer ticked down. 30 seconds. The commander's mind drifted unbidden to Earth, to the brass who'd cut them loose, the colonies they'd fought for, the people who'd never know what this ship had done. He didn't hate them. Not anymore. Hate took energy and he was spent. 10 seconds, the lieutenant said, her voice cutting through the haze. She stood straighter, facing the viewport like she was daring the dreadnoughts to look her in the eye. He rose too, stepping beside her. The Ares trembled, its death throes shaking the air. 5 seconds. The dreadnoughts filled the view, their cannons charging for the kill shot. They'd never get to fire. 3, 2, 1. A hand grabbed his arm. Hard, real, not the ghost, of memory. His vision blurred, then snapped into focus. He wasn't on the bridge. He was in a pod, strapped tight, the lieutenant beside him, her face pale but alive. The Ares was a shrinking dot on a cracked view screen, the dreadnoughts swarming it like flies. A flash, brighter than any star, erupted, swallowing the ship and half the enemy fleet in a sphere of annihilation. The shockwave hit, rocking. The pod. But it held. What the hell? He started, voice hoarse. Remote trigger, she said, breathless. Said it before we launched. You didn't think I'd let you stay, did you? He stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. She dragged him off the bridge, overridden his death wish with a stubbornness he hadn't seen coming. The Ares was gone, its final act a blaze of glory. But they weren't. Not yet. The pod's comms buzzed, the Allies' voice cutting through. You're alive. Damn it, I owe someone a drink. Rendezvous points ahead. Pods are safe, but the Council's still out there. Move fast. The commander leaned back, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. They'd lost the ship, but they'd gutted the enemy, bought time for the crew. It wasn't over. The Council would hunt them. Earth would deny them. And the galaxy wouldn't forgive. But as the pod streaked toward the rogue ships, he felt a spark. Reignite. The Ares was dead. Its fight wasn't. Get us there, he said, voice rough but steady. We're not done yet. The pod rattled through the void, its hull creaking under the strain of a journey it wasn't built to endure. The commander sat strapped in, his hands clenched around the armrests, staring at the cracked view screen. The Ares Ascendant was gone, a fading smear of light and debris on the sensor feed, its final explosion still echoing in his bones. Half the Council's fleet had gone with it, dreadnoughts reduced to twisted husks drifting in the dark. A victory, maybe, if you could call losing everything a win. He didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow, like the ship had taken a piece of him when it blew. The lieutenant worked the pod's controls, her movements precise despite the sweat beading on her forehead. She'd saved him, dragged him off the bridge, triggered the core remotely, kept them both breathing when he'd been ready to burn. He hadn't thanked her yet. Didn't know how. Words felt cheap against the weight of what they'd lost. Rendezvous in 5 minutes, she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the pod's struggling systems. The others are already there. Pods. linked up with those rogue ships. We're the last ones. He grunted, his gaze shifting to the sensor display. The rogue fleet, or what was left of it, blipped faintly ahead. 5 battered hulks holding position near an asteroid cluster. Their ally's voice had promised safety, but safety was a lie out here. The Council wouldn't let this slide. They'd lost their Ecliptor, half their armada, and whatever pride they'd clung to. They'd hunt the Ares crew to the edge of the galaxy, and Earth wouldn't lift a finger to stop it. Disavowed meant disposable. You trust him? She asked, not looking up from her console. This guy who showed up out of nowhere? No, he said flatly. But he's all we've got. She nodded, like that was enough. It wasn't. Not really. But they'd run out of choices the moment the Ares launched. The pod shuddered again, a warning light flashing. Fuel reserves dipping into the red. They'd make it. Barely, if nothing went wrong. He didn't bet on that. Anymore. The comms buzzed and the rough voice crackled through. You're cutting it close. Dock's open. Get in quick. We've got company on the scopes. Company? The commander leaned forward, his gut tightening. Council? Not yet. The voice replied. Scavengers, maybe. Or worse. Point is, we're not sticking around to find out. The lieutenant adjusted their trajectory, the pod lurching toward the lead rogue ship, a hulking freighter with more patches than paint. Its bay yawned open, a dim maw swallowing them as they coasted in. The landing was rough, metal screeching against metal, but the clamps locked and the pod powered down with a groan. For a moment, silence. Then the hiss of the hatch as it unsealed. He unstrapped, rising stiffly, every muscle screaming from the fight. The lieutenant followed, her steps steady despite the shadows under her eyes. They stepped out into the freighter's bay, a cavernous space lit by flickering strips littered with crates and the stench of burnt wiring. Figures moved in the gloom, hardened men and women armed and wary, their faces a mix of relief and suspicion as the pod's crew gathered. A man strode forward, tall and grizzled, his coat patched with colony insignia long faded. That voice, in the flesh, older, rougher, but unmistakable. You look like hell, he said, a crooked grin breaking through the scars. Good to see you anyway. The commander didn't return the smile. You've got a lot of explaining to do. Who are you running with, and why'd you stick your neck out for us? The man's grin faded, his eyes sharpening. Call it a debt. You and that ship. You lit a fire the galaxy needed. These folks, he gestured to the crew behind him. They're the ones who've been waiting for it. Outcasts, rebels, people Earth forgot. We're not much, but we're yours. If you'll have us. Mine? The commander's laugh was harsh. I don't even have a ship anymore. You've got a name, the man said. And what you did out there, that's a spark. Council's rattled, Earth squirming. We can use that. The lieutenant stepped closer, her voice low. He's right. We're alive. That's more than they expected. We can still fight. He looked at her. Then at the ragtag group, maybe 50 strong, their ships barely spaceworthy but bristling with defiance. A spark, he'd said. Maybe. But sparks could fizzle, and the Council's fist was still out there, hunting. He felt the weight of it all. The Ares loss, the crew's trust, the betrayal of Earth. It pressed down, threatening to crush him. But beneath it, something stirred. Anger, purpose. What's the plan? He asked, meeting the man's gaze. Hide. For now, the man said. Regroup, rearm. The Council thinks you're dead. Let's keep it that way. There's a colony. Fringe space. Owes me favors. We start there. And then? The lieutenant pressed. Then we hit back. The man answered, his grin returning, savage now. Harder. A klaxon blared, ripping through the scene. One of the rebels shouted from a console. Contacts closing fast. Energy spikes. Council signatures. The commander's blood ran cold. Not scavengers. The Council had tracked them. Faster than he'd imagined. The freighter's engines groaned, the deck tilting as it readied to run. He glanced at the lieutenant, saw the anger in her eyes reflect. His own. Get us moving, he said to the man. We're not dying here. The vessel lurched and the combat began again. The freighter's engines screamed as it tore across the emptiness, the asteroid cluster dwindling to specks behind it. The commander braced against a bulkhead in the tiny bay, the deck trembling beneath his feet. The air stank of sweat and burnt metal, the renegade crew yelling over the blaring of alarms. The council had located them, too fast, too accurate. And now, their ships were closing, a trio of fast frigates tearing through space like blades. No dreadnoughts this time, no ecliptor. But these were hunters, built for speed and murder, and the freighter was a ponderous beast by comparison. "Status!" he barked, his voice carrying over the commotion. The lieutenant fought her way through the crowd, reaching a jury-rigged console bolted to the wall. "They're gaining! 3 minutes until we're in range. Our escorts are splitting out to intercept, but they won't hold long," he cursed under his breath. The renegade ships, those patched-up relics, were courageous but outmatched. They'd purchased time with the Ares sacrifice, but time was a coin running dry. He glanced to the grizzled man who dragged them from the fire, his coat flying as he screamed directions to his team. "You said we'd conceal. This isn't concealing." The man shot him a look, part gloomy, half grin. "Plans alter when the bastards get smart. They must have tagged one of the pods, followed us here. We're rushing for the jump point. Fringe. Space. If we make it, we're ghosts. If," the commander mumbled. He didn't like ifs. Ifs got people killed. He peered at the console's flickering display. 2 of the renegade spacecraft were already receiving hits, their signatures flickering out as plasma lances cut them apart. The freighter's hull groaned, a deep, melancholy sound, and he felt the loss of the Ares all over again. A wound that wouldn't close. "Shields at 60%, the lieutenant reported, her voice tense. "Engines overheating. We've got maybe 10 minutes before we're dead in the ocean." "Push it," he murmured, meeting her gaze. "All or nothing." She nodded, sending the order to the rebels at the helm. The ship lurched, its thrusters burning brighter, but the council frigates kept pace, their energy signatures spiking as armaments charged. The commander's mind raced, alternatives shrinking, each one bleaker than the previous. Fight and die. Run and maybe die. Surrender wasn't on the table, not after what they had done, not with the Ares ghost still burning in the abyss. A rebel, a wiry lady with a damaged face, stumbled over, grasping a portable scanner. "Jump points in range, but they're locking disruptors. If they shoot, we're stuck." The grizzled guy swore, striking a fist against a crate. Then, "We don't let them fire. Guns. Focus on their lead ship. Buy us a window." The freighter's turrets whined to life, spewing salvos of kinetic bullets into the dark. The lead frigate jinked, its shields flashing, but it didn't slow. A plasma, shot returned, crashing into the freighter's flank. The deck bucked, sending crates sliding, and a scream cut across the bay as a rebel went down, pinned by rubble. The commander straightened himself, the taste of blood in his mouth, his own from a bitten lip. "Shields at 40%, the lieutenant remarked, her voice rising. "Hull bursts on decks 3 and 4. Sealing, but we're losing air." He grasped the console's edge, staring at the jump point's coordinates pulsating on the screen. Close. So dang near. But the frigates were approaching, their disruptors glowing hot. One shot and they'd be trapped, picked apart like carrion. He felt the weight of it all. The crew's life, the rebels' faith, the Ares' legacy, pressing down, threatening to break him. But he'd never broken easy. "Ramming speed," he replied, the words cold and final. The lieutenant's head snapped. Up. "What?" "Angle us at the lead frigate," he added. "Full burn. They won't expect it. Gives the others a shot at the jump." The elderly guy spun, eyes wide. "You'll kill us all." "Maybe," the commander shot back. "Or we take one with us, and the rest get clear. Your call, lead or follow." A heartbeat of silence. Then the man nodded, gloomy. "Helm, do it. Full burn." The cargo surged, its engines roaring as it swung toward the lead frigate. The council ship loomed larger on the view screen, its crew no doubt scrambling as the collision path recorded. The lieutenant grasped his arm, her breath fast. "This better work." "It will," he lied, hoping she didn't hear the skepticism. The gap closed. 5 kilometers, 3, 1. The frigate fired, a disruptor beam lancing out, but the freighter's mass ate it, shields crumbling in a shower of sparks. "Impact in 10 seconds. The commander braced, the bay a cacophony of shouts in strained metal. 5 seconds. The view screen whited out as the ships met. A jolt, bone-rattling, world-ending. Then darkness. He came to, sprawled on the deck, ears ringing. The lieutenant was beside him, coughing, alive. The console flickered, hull critical, engines offline. But the jump point was gone. They'd made it. The frigate hadn't. "Status," he rasped. "2 ships left." The ice, grizzled man murmured, limping over. "We rammed him, jumped mid-collision. They're gone, but we're hobbling." The commander pushed to his feet, the pain a faraway roar. They'd survived. Barely. Fringe space spread beyond the shattered view screen, a refuge or a cemetery. The council would come again, but for now, they'd slipped the noose. He looked at the lieutenant, saw the fire still burning in her. They weren't done. "Get us patched up," he urged. "We've got work to do." The freighter floated across edge space, a wounded beast nursing its wounds in the shadow of a nameless gas giant. The commander stood in the bay, the air heavy, with the smell of fried circuits and the faint buzz of jury-rigged repairs. The view screen, cracked but functional, showed the abyss beyond, a murky swirl of purples and blacks where the galaxy's edge blurred into uncontrolled oblivion. They'd made it. Barely. The collision with the Council frigate, a gamble that had paid off in survival, not triumph. 2 rogue spacecraft remained, their crews bruised but breathing. The rest of the pods accounted for. The Ares Ascendant was a memory now, its flare of grandeur a scar on the Council's pride. But the fight wasn't done. The lieutenant came, her face covered with filth, a data slate in hand. "Hull's holding, patches will get us to the settlement. Engines are at 20%, but we're progressing. Crew's upset, but they're with us." He nodded, his attention riveted on the gas giant's rings glinting slightly in the distance. "And the council?" "No signatures yet," she replied. "Jump threw them off, but they'll figure it out. They usually do." She was right. The council wouldn't stop, not after losing their Ecliptor, their frigates, their image of dominance. The Ares had been a slap. This escape was a knife twist. They'd seek these margins, scour every rock and shadow, until they stamped out. The spark humanity had sparked. He felt the weight of it. Every life on this ship, every rebel who'd thrown in with them. It wasn't simply about survival anymore. It was about what followed next. The grizzled man staggered over, his coat smeared with oil, his grin long gone. "Colony's a day out. Old mining outpost. Off the grid. They've got fuel, parts, people who loathe the council as much as we do. It's a start." "A start," the commander murmured, his voice raspy. "We're down to 2 ships, half a crew, and no weaponry worth a damn. What's the endgame?" The man's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of steel beneath the tiredness. "You're the endgame. That ship of yours? Gone, undoubtedly. But what it did? That's a tale spreading faster than we can run. Colonies are whispering. Outcasts are listening. Earth might have cut you loose, but the galaxy's watching. We build on that." "Build what?" the lieutenant inquired, her tone harsh. "An army? With what resources?" "Whatever we can scrape," the man said. "Steal, trade, fight." For the council stretched, losing that fleet harmed him. "We targeted their edges, their supply lines, their vulnerable areas. Small at first, then bigger." The commander turned, meeting their gazes, one flaming with pragmatism, the other with reckless hope. He saw the Ares in his mind's eye, its sleek hull, its cannons booming, its final defiant spark. It had been a weapon, yes, but more than that. A symbol. Humanity didn't bow, didn't break, didn't beg. He'd lost it, nearly lost everything. But the fire it had sparked still burned. In him, in them. "Small's not enough," he answered, finally. "They'll come hard next time. Not frigates, the complete armada. We need more than whispers and scavengers." "Then we get it," the lieutenant remarked, stepping closer. "Colonies. Pirates. Anyone who's had their throat under the council's boot. We've got proof now. They're not invincible. We use that." He stared at her, saw the steel in her spine. The same resolve that had dragged him off the Ares bridge. She wasn't wrong. The council had bled. They could bleed again. But it would take more than courage. It would take a plan. A fleet? A conflict they weren't ready to wage. Yet. The man clapped a hand on his shoulder, a rare weight of trust in the gesture. "You lead, we follow. That's the agreement. Colony, step 1. Rest up, rearm. Figure out who's with us. After that, we make them pay." A klaxon chirped. Soft, not urgent. The rebel at the helm cried out, "Jump points clear." "Course locked for the colony?" The commander nodded. "Take us in." The vessel lurched, its engines coughing but obedient, limping toward sanctuary. He stayed where he was, the bay quieting as the crew relaxed into the unsettling serenity of survival. The lieutenant lingered alongside him, silent but present, her data slate black now. He didn't need to inquire what she was thinking. It was the same thing chewing at him. The Ares was gone, but its shadow lingered long. Earth had abandoned them. The Council had underestimated them. And the cosmos would feel the fallout. He thought of the ship's last moments, the Corps' scream, the dreadnoughts vanishing in its anger. It had been banned, they'd said. Too advanced, too hazardous. They were right, and he'd make damn sure they regretted it. Not with one ship this time, but with a fleet, a movement, a reckoning. The colony was a foothold, fringe space, a place to breathe, to prepare. They'd lost everything, but they'd won something too, a chance to hit back harder. "Rest while you can," he murmured to the lieutenant, his voice low. "This isn't the end." She caught his eyes, a small spark lighting hers. "No, it's the beginning." The vessel slipped under the gas giant's shadow, the stars vanishing behind its mass. Out there, the Council nursed its wounds. Earth buried its shame, and the rumors grew louder. The Ares was dead. Its crew wasn't. And the cosmos wasn't ready for what followed next. Hey everyone! If you enjoy these epic HFY stories, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment below to let us know your favorite part or what stories you'd love to hear next. Your support keeps the channel growing and the stories coming. Thanks for being part of this channel.